Greetings, this is Ty Brown with Athletic Director U. We are here at the 2022 Women Leaders Conference, and I'm joined by Jean Taylor. Jean is the Director of Athletics at Kansas State University. Greetings, Jean. Thanks for joining us.
Ty, thanks for being here. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate you having on, and I just wanted to have a quick conversation about leadership and kind of career development. Looking at your career, Kansas State there for 6 years, I believe, one of the 6 years.
That's correct.
Yep, and Athletic Director at North Dakota State for a while. Spent some time at Navy and a quick stint at Iowa.
That's
right?
correct.
And then when I think of Kansas State, I think of like stability, just because I come from the football coaching kind of industry. You think of Bill Synder there for a long time, left and then came back and kind of stabilized things. And I think that's on purpose. The culture of the university kind of has that perception of being stable. Now presidents just change, but I think that's on purpose, and it has to do with the leadership in place, whether it be as a coach or whether it be as the athletic director, president. So talk to us a little bit about that, kind of being perceived as a stable university. You hope, right? In college athletics changes, but that.
Yeah, certainly. Coach Synder was there for a long time, and he did establish great consistency in just how he coached and what the program was about. Right. And I think other things fell in place along with, just the general administration, the general operation. We have staff that have been there many, many years, which is great for me, particularly even though I've been there 6 years coming in as a new AD, to have that history and that understanding of how important consistency is. And you're right, Coach Synder left, and we saw it change, and so he came back and kind of brought us back to what he believed in, and so when he decided to step away and retire, it was a big challenge. But I think that consistency and being a program of stability is really important, particularly in today's world.
Yeah, it is. You spent a couple quick years at Iowa as deputy athletics director, and of course before you were you were the athletic director at North Dakota State. Saw a lot of success in North Dakota State, and you made the choice to go to Iowa to become a deputy. Some people would see it as an interesting career move. Some people would see it as strategic. So I wonder about your thought process as you were going through that.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I've actually now had that question from some of my colleagues that are looking to try to move up into the Power 5 world. We had a great run at North Dakota State. We were a very good program, both athletically and then how we ran things. We raised some money, but I wasn't getting the opportunity to interview for Power 5 jobs, and that was one of my career goals. And Gary Barta, a good friend of mine, came to me at one point and said, hey, we're going to have a lot of change in our administration. I've never had a deputy position, but I'm looking to bring on a deputy. And I thought about it, and was this a step back? Is this a good move for me? And it was. I learned a lot. It was probably, could I have made it a transition from from North Dakota State to Kansas State? Probably, but the learning curve would have been bigger. Yeah. What I learned under Gary's leadership and how he handled things and the magnitude of a school like that, dealing with coaches with big presence, big contracts, longevity, Kirk Ferentz, et cetera, really helped me a lot. And then I was able to get some interviews and ultimately land at Kansas State, and it's helped me a great deal.
That's interesting. I wonder, as you look back and think about, you were at North Dakota State and you went to the Gary Barta Academy of Athletic Director Development, right?
Right.
But you were at North Dakota State for a number of years and probably felt like you were doing a good job. But then you worked at Iowa and saw there were some things that you probably needed to learn about being in this big-time program. What were a couple of those things that you felt like?
Well, one of the things which was, probably the biggest eye-opener was the budget and how decisions were made at that level with those kind of dollars. And not that they were made haphazardly, they were very strategic, but it was just different. At North Dakota State, I kind of knew what every pencil and pen was and how much it cost. At a place like Iowa with $100+ million budget, you still wanted to move your program forward, and so there were some things that were easier, but at the same time there were some more challenges because the demand was higher. Coaches' salaries were higher. You dealt with agents, and we didn't really have agents at North Dakota State. Coaches are starting to get them now, but when I was there, we didn't. And so learning to understand that and how that communication was between coaches and agents and staff, and making sure they understood, where we were in the budget. Everybody wanting more, but yet you had a lot, but you still couldn't give everybody everything. Those things really helped me a great deal.
Yeah, I think that's important. When we do things for a number of years and we create habits in our brain, the synapses work in ways that they work. When you got into the chair at Kansas State, were there some things that immediately snap back into position in terms of this is how.
Yeah, there is absolutely. You step away. I tell this to people all the time. When you become a deputy, if you've been an AD, one, you have to check your ego a little bit. You're no longer in charge, but you have to be honest with. Like Gary and I had a great relationship, and I could tell him things and challenge him, and he could challenge me, and then ultimately it was his decision. So you really have to kind of let go. That's probably the big thing. And then once you become an AD again, it's realizing how important the people around you are, and how much you really need their support and their trust. And I was able to rely back on that, and then you just have some natural comfort levels you are with some decision making, like I've made this decision before, or I've faced this situation before, and it is a little bit easier.
Yeah, it gets easier. One thing I've been contemplating on recently is in terms of strategic thinking and the ability to be agile and move and evolve when need to, but also you also have to be consistent, right? Right? There's two things that probably can contradict each other in certain instances, but in terms of being strategic, you probably need to learn how to do both. Tell us a little bit about that. We're 6 years in at Kansas State, and you try to get things stable in an ever-changing college athletics industry.
Well, I think it's even more so that's important more now than it probably ever has been. That as I say, don't lock your knees. You have to be flexible. And for a guy like me that's been in the business a long time, that's very traditional in the way I've come up and the way I was taught. That tradition changes, and we have NIL now, we have transfer portal, we have athletes having a greater voice, we have decision makers that have to be made quick, we have coaches changing quickly, and so all those things you really have to learn to adjust. But I think consistency in those decisions, even though you're changing, is a key. And we went through the pandemic, and that was new to everybody, and not panicking and showing some consistency and not only decision making but treatment of your staff. But you have to be able to adjust quickly, and yet stay consistent with who you are and what your program's about.
Is there an aspect of, I remember when I was at the Coaches Association and we would get speakers, and you always knew with Coach Snyder's staff, they've been there for 17,000 years. And you could, you could depend on somebody to come and talk, and it was what you needed.
Right.
But I wonder, when you're there for a long time, or you're at a place where people have been around for a long time, is there value in bringing that new diversity of thought? And how do you do that if people aren't moving? Right? How do you?
Yeah, no, and you're right. I mean, I think from Coach Snyder's perspective, he was there a long time, and his staff had been there, and yet I think when he did hire younger staff or new staff, it was probably more of a challenge for them to get their thoughts across, because it is Coach, and you can't argue with the success. From my perspective as the athletic director, it is valuable to bring in new thought process, new ideas, somebody coming from the outside. I was able to do that coming in as the deputy at Iowa for Gary, kind of looking at things that, we're always doing this the way we've always done it, or here's a new way to look at it. And so I think it's really critical, again, in today's world, the way things are changing, that diversity of thought is very, very important.
It's important. Thinking about hiring staff, now this is an assumption I'll make, but when you want to bring somebody on, especially in a high level position, almost like what Gary did when he brought you on Iowa, you almost got to sell it to them. Like, this is, you see who we are, you see what we've done, but here's what's the reality, which is probably better than we look outside. Here's a reality which is better, and here's some things that we need to work on, but I think you're the person that we should bring in. Talk to us about that aspect of recruiting somebody for your staff, and, whether it be coaches, administrators.
Well, one of the things for us, Manhattan, people don't know a lot about Manhattan, Kansas, and so the ability to get somebody to understand, the community is a very welcoming community. It's a smaller community, but it's a great college town. But it's not, out in the middle of nowhere. And I think so. Just the geography of where we are is always a bit of a challenge. And then, people come in and they maybe have a thought process of who Kansas State is, and yet when they get there and they see the facilities, they see how modern we are, and then they're pretty impressed with that. So we have to do a little bit of selling, and particularly from a diversity perspective, it's critically important that we have a diverse staff, and we've been able to do that and hire and make a really strong effort in that area. But you know, sometimes it's difficult because people just aren't very familiar with who Manhattan is. But you do have to sell it.
Yeah, that diversity thing. A good friend of mine works on staff there, Van Malone.
Oh, yeah.
DB's coach, and I followed him throughout his career. We were good friends when I was at the American Football Coaches Association, and he does celebrate you as one of the people who talk about diversity and how it's important, especially there in Manhattan. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about how do you, as someone who believes in it, help others to believe in it, so that I heard somebody say that it's not just myth and ceremony, right? It's not just titles and things like that. Tell me about
well,
that.
I think it's just because you know, some people, you can talk about it,
mm-hmm.
but you also have to have action.
Yeah.
And you have to make a strong effort, like I said, to bring in diverse candidate pools.
Mm-hmm.
And then once we have them within our department, have staff, we do a lot of effort amongst our staff. We have luncheon just for our black coaches. We have meetings just for black staff. We have a black coach or student athlete. It's called PALS, and just to make sure they have their chance to have their voice. And we shared some really tough conversations, and we had some really tough conversations, you know, during the George Floyd era and those issues. And that was something really critical for them to be able to say, no, you don't get it. This is important to us. And so I think you have to have action as opposed to just, you know, saying, okay, we're going to advertise in certain areas. But if you can advertise, but if you don't make a true effort to go out and recruit talented, diverse staff, then I don't think it's real, in my opinion.
No, I agree with that. I'll ask you a couple questions here before we wrap. Thinking about.
By the way, Van Malone's awesome. He is
I like
awesome.
him a lot.
He is awesome.
Thinking about, you know, evolution as a leader. You know, spent a long time at Navy, which just being at Navy itself, there's probably a whole lot of leadership development and learning and evolving and absorbing in there. But then you're as an athletic director, you go to a deputy, now you're here at Kansas State. I wonder about the learning process. You know, it always behooves a leader to realize there's always much more to learn. But at some stage, you got to realize, the things I'm learning, are they keeping me who I am, or am I learning things that are helping me to evolve with what's evolving around me? What is your learning process and how you go about it?
That's a great question. You know, obviously, I try to evolve. You know, over the, you know, I've worked for people that I used to take notes of how to do things well and how not to do things. You know, because you can learn both from somebody that's maybe a person ahead of you or a mentor. They may do some great things and may do some things you're like, well, I may not do it that way, you know, kind of thing. And so, and then I read a lot, you know, and not necessarily motivational books, but just about the industry. You know, if an institution's having a challenge, you know, how are they handling it? How are they handling their press conference? What are the questions they, you know? And so I really want to know, is there better ways that I could do it? Or if I were in that same situation, would I do it that way or would I do it this way? And so, and then I also learn from our younger staff. I try to realize that they're coming in with some really fresh ideas, and can they help me learn and become a better leader? And certainly, I think that's always important as well.
Which is excellent. One thing Dutch Baughman always emphasized when I would be the one working the PowerPoints, right, or taking notes or something, I always heard him telling everybody in the room that you have to find that quiet space, take time for yourself, and either think or don't think, whatever you need to do, but you need that time for yourself. I wonder about that for you. Is that something that you have always working on, or like?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. It's kind of evolved. Like when my kids were younger, my quiet time was with them and doing their things, whether it's sports or music or whatever, just going and being a part of their lives as much. And I still am, and that's what. And the one thing we really enjoy is I do take the 2 good weeks during the summer. And I try to just get away. And fortunately, now my kids are in their 20s, they still want to hang out. And there's nothing better than that. And then occasionally I'll get home and shut it down. You know, I'll sit around and just watch mindless television or sports and not look at my phone and just kind of take a break. But you have to do that. Otherwise, you just got to have some time for yourself.
You just got to find your way as your career evolves. You evolve with it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, excellent. I appreciate you taking the time to have a quick conversation on leadership.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, Ty.
That was Gene Taylor. He's the Director of Athletics at Kansas State. And of course, I am Ty Brown with Athletic Director U. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today.